I first noticed the envelope because it did not belong in a place like that. The military police headquarters at Fort Liberty is loud with radios and boots and printers that never stop humming. Nothing about it usually feels still, but that envelope was. It sat on the corner of my desk like it had been placed there carefully by someone who did not want to disturb anything around it. A manila envelope, thick, sealed, marked CID investigation notice in dark, bold letters. I froze. For a second, the entire hallway sounded distant. The overhead lights buzzed louder than normal. My pulse began to climb in my throat. I picked it up slowly, the way you would pick up something that might detonate if you moved too fast. My hands felt too warm and too cold at the same time. I had been an MP officer for 7 years. I had seen hundreds of legal packets cross desks. I had prepared some myself, but I had never received one addressed to me. My name was printed across the top. First Lieutenant Peyton Ward. My stomach tightened at the sight of it. A faint pressure curled across my lower abdomen. At 14 weeks pregnant, I should have been more careful. Stress was a knife with no warning. But all I felt in that moment was disbelief tightening around my ribs. I opened the envelope with my thumb, careful not to tear the corners. Inside were multiple documents clipped together. I skimmed the first line and the world slid sideways. You are hereby notified that you are under investigation for dereliction of duty and misuse of authority. My lungs forgot how to pull in air. My vision flickered white at the edges. I blinked and kept reading because stopping felt more terrifying. The letter was written in the exact format CID uses. The fonts matched. The seal looked real. The signature at the bottom was from Special Agent in Charge Ryan Mercer. Except I had met Mercer before. He signed with a distinctive right-leaning slant. This one was different, straighter. Too clean. A small part of me whispered that something was wrong. A larger part of me drowned beneath panic. A CID investigation can end careers. I had spent my entire adult life building mine. Every promotion, every evaluation, every training cycle, every shift where I held my soldiers together. All of it could collapse in a moment. I felt the ground tilt again. The pressure in my abdomen sharpened. Not pain yet, just a warning. I pressed my palm against my stomach through my uniform blouse. My baby. I swallowed hard. No one knew except my mother and Sergeant Imani Brooks. I had not even told my chain of command yet. I wanted to pass the second trimester before saying anything. I wanted to protect the tiny life inside me for as long as I could. But stress does not care about your planning. It does not ask what you want to protect. It just strikes. I tried to breathe slow, but the air felt thick. I flipped to the next page. It listed the allegations: improper conduct, abuse of MP authority, possible involvement in evidence mishandling. My legs trembled. I reached for the back of my chair and missed. I had to sit before I collapsed, so I lowered myself onto the edge of the desk instead. A soldier passing by asked if I was all right. I nodded, even though I could barely focus. The pressure in my abdomen pulsed again, sharp enough that I had to grit my teeth. I reread the signature. I reread the seal. Something was wrong. Something did not add up. But fear drowned logic. All I could think was, this cannot be happening. Not now. Not when I finally felt like life was settling. I set the packet down. My hands shook violently. I tried to stand, but the room dipped. The lights overhead seemed too bright. My heart hit hard against my ribs with every breath. Then warmth spread down the inside of my thigh. Slow at first, then steady. I froze, afraid to look. My hand moved on its own. I touched the fabric of my uniform pants and pulled my fingers away. Wet, sticky, darker than it should be. A wave of terror crashed through me so strong my knees buckled. The hallway tilted. Someone shouted my name. Brooks sprinted across the room and caught my arm before I hit the floor. Her voice sounded far away. "LT Ward, stay with me! Stay with me!" But the pressure in my abdomen exploded into real pain. Sharp, deep, wrong, very wrong. My breath came out in gasps. Everything blurred except the thought pounding through my head. Not my baby. Not my baby. The edges of my vision darkened. My ears rang. Brooks lifted me with both arms and yelled for a medic. My fingers slipped from the envelope as she dragged me toward the exit. The hallway lights streaked above me as if pulled by gravity. The last thing I saw before everything turned black was the envelope on the floor. The fake signature. The real fear. The unbearable truth settling in my chest. Someone had done this to me on purpose. Someone who knew exactly how to break me. As darkness closed in, a single question echoed through my mind like a warning. What kind of person would pretend to be CID just to destroy me? And then nothing. Have you ever had someone in your own family aim to crush you in a way the world would never see coming? People often assume that anyone who becomes a military police officer must come from a disciplined family or a childhood shaped by clear rules and firm boundaries. They imagine a household where someone taught you to stand straight, speak clearly, and face trouble head-on. My life was the opposite of that. My childhood felt like walking through a maze built by someone who kept changing the walls just to watch you panic. I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina, in a small rental house a few miles from the Cape Fear River. My mother worked as a teacher's assistant at an elementary school and spent her evenings cleaning offices to make extra money. For most of my early years, it was just the two of us. She was soft-spoken and gentle, and she loved me in a quiet way that made everything feel safe. Then she married Brett Coleman when I was 14, and the softness disappeared almost overnight. Brett arrived in our lives like a storm no one had prepared for. He drank every evening and insisted it was just to unwind. He criticized the way my mother cooked, the way she dressed, the way she walked. He criticized me even more. He had a special talent for finding the exact sentence that could bruise without leaving marks. When I considered joining the Army, he laughed and said girls who join the military are running from something. I told him that wanting a stable career and a life with purpose was not running. He told me purpose was something people made up when they had no direction. Every conversation with him felt like walking barefoot across broken shells. He was always ready to throw out some comment about my weakness, or my future, or how I would not make it past basic training. The night before I shipped out to Fort Leonard Wood for MP school, he said I would quit in a week. I did not quit. I graduated near the top of my class and pinned on lieutenant bars after officer candidate school. I thought putting distance between myself and Brett would be enough to quiet his voice. It never fully worked. Some people dig so deep into your nerves that even silence sounds like them. After I joined the Army, I called home less and less. Not because I did not love my mother, but because every call seemed to circle back to him. If he answered the phone, he would make some remark about me thinking I was better than everyone else, or pretend he was proud in a way that felt mocking. If my mother answered, she spoke in a quick, breathless tone like she was afraid he was listening. I sent money when she needed it and visited during holidays when duty allowed, but I never stayed long. Being around Brett felt like shrinking. The Army became my escape. In uniform, I felt strong and steady. My soldiers looked to me for guidance, and I surprised myself by how naturally leadership came when I was surrounded by people who valued structure and integrity. Military police work is not glamorous. It is long nights and long investigations and sorting through truth that people try very hard to hide. But I loved it. I loved the clarity. Evidence does not lie. Procedures do not lie. Regulations do not shift depending on someone's mood. Every evaluation I received praised my calm under stress and my fairness. My peers often told me that I had a quiet strength that made others want to follow my lead. I was the officer who listened before speaking and who made decisions without letting emotions cloud judgment. I was the one who kept my soldiers steady during difficult calls. Ironically, the traits that made me strong at work did not always translate to my personal life. I married young shortly after graduating OCS. My ex-husband Daniel was an aviation mechanic who had a warm smile and a gentle voice. For a while, things seemed steady, but deployments wear people down and grief settled on us after his father died unexpectedly. We could not find our way back to each other. The divorce was peaceful but painful, and for a long time I thought I would never want to be close to anyone again. When I found out I was pregnant months after the separation, I felt a mix of fear and hope. Daniel and I had spoken once. He said he wished me well, but admitted he was not in a place to be a father. It left me with a quiet ache, but also a strange sense of clarity. This baby was mine to protect. It made me feel stronger than I had in years. I had not told my chain of command yet. I wanted to wait until I passed the second trimester. I had only told 2 people. My mother and Sergeant Imani Brooks. Brooks was the kind of soldier every officer prays to have on their team. Sharp eyes, soft heart. She noticed everything. When I was exhausted, she caught it before I even said a word. When I needed space, she protected it. When I told her about the pregnancy, she hugged me so tightly I felt my shoulders unlock. She said she hoped this baby would bring light back into my life. She had no idea how quickly that light would be threatened. The further along my pregnancy progressed, the more I could feel 2 worlds inside me. The world where I was Lieutenant Ward, calm and steady and reliable. And the world where I was still the girl in Wilmington, trying not to flinch when Brett raised his voice. My soldiers respected me. My chain of command trusted me. But whenever I thought about telling my family about the baby, I felt something twist inside me. I knew exactly how Brett would react. He would twist the news into something ugly. He always did. I told myself I would keep my distance, that I was strong enough now, that being an officer meant I had outgrown his reach. I believed that until the moment I opened the fake CID packet. In that moment, I realized I had never been free of him. Not really. And whatever he had done to reach into my life again was only the beginning. When I woke up in the hospital, the light above me looked too white. Not bright, but empty, like someone had drained the warmth out of it. The room smelled like antiseptic and cotton and something sharp under the surface that reminded me of fear. My abdomen still ached in a dull pull, but the bleeding had slowed and I could breathe without feeling like the world was sitting on my chest. A nurse checked my vitals and told me to stay calm and that the doctor would be in shortly. Calm, as if calm were something you could switch on with a button. My head was still swimming from the collapse at HQ. I remembered flashes, the envelope on the floor, Brooks shouting my name, the pressure tightening inside me like a fist. I tried to sit up, but the nurse guided me back down gently and said the doctor would explain everything. I stared at the ceiling and tried to keep my mind from spiraling into the places that hurt the most. When the doctor arrived, she had the kind of face that could steady an entire room. Kind eyes, firm voice posture that conveyed authority without arrogance. She asked me what I remembered, and I told her bits and pieces like scattered puzzle edges. She explained that I had experienced acute stress symptoms which could be dangerous during pregnancy and that they wanted to monitor me for at least 24 hours. She said the words carefully as if she knew each one carried weight. Then she looked at me and said something I will never forget. "You need to control your stress, Lieutenant Ward, not just for you, for your child." The sentence hit like a stone dropped into a frozen lake. I nodded, but inside something folded in on itself. Stress was not just discomfort. Stress could take what I loved most. I already knew that, but hearing it in a sterile medical room made it real in a way that left my hands trembling. She asked if anything unusual had happened that morning, and I laughed even though nothing about it was funny. I told her about the CID packet, the accusations, the signature that did not look right. Her eyebrows rose slightly because she understood enough about the military to know what such a document implied. She asked if the letter was verified, and when I said no, her expression tightened. She told me that false investigations are rare but dangerous because of the psychological weight they carry. Then she repeated the warning. "You must reduce any source of stress. You and the baby are both vulnerable now." Vulnerable. The word echoed inside me like an old bruise being pressed again. I promised her I would try, but the truth was I had no idea how. Not with my history. Not with Brett. After she left the room, Brooke stepped in. Her uniform was still rumpled from carrying me, and there was worry in every line of her face. She sat next to me and folded her hands like she was grounding herself before she spoke. "LT, the packet looks wrong. All wrong. The letterhead is correct, but the spacing is off. The signature is messy. Mercer always signs clean, and there is no way CID would send something like that without contacting command first." She said all of this in her usual calm, steady tone, but I could hear the heat beneath it. She was angry for me. angry at whoever had done this. She told me she had shown the envelope to Staff Sergeant Delgado and he also believed it was fake, but when she looked at me, she hesitated because she could see I did not share her confidence. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust my training and my instincts and the logic that said CID procedures do not work this way. But fear has its own laws, and my fear was old. It was shaped like Brett. That fear had lived under my skin for years, and it whispered things that were hard to silence. What if it was real? What if someone had actually accused me? What if everything I had worked for was sliding out from under me? Brooks kept watching me like she could read the thoughts fighting inside my head. She finally asked the question that hung between us. LT, who knew enough about you to make something like this? And the way she said who knew enough made my stomach drop because the truth was simple. Very few people knew enough details about my life and my career to forge something that specific. I whispered my mother's name, but even as I said it, I knew she would never harm me. She was gentle to a fault and afraid of conflict. She had always been caught between protecting me and pleasing Brett. Then the truth crept in the way winter cold creeps into a room. Brett knew I was pregnant. He should not have known, but he did. It explained why his tone on the phone had changed, why he had sounded too calm, too amused. He had always resented the Army. He had always made comments about ending my career before it started, and he knew the timeline. He knew how investigations worked. He knew how to hurt me without touching me. Still, the idea that he could have done something this calculated made my throat tighten. I told Brooks what I feared. She shook her head in disbelief and then leaned in close like she needed me to hear her clearly. LT, if he did this, we will find proof. CID will find proof. But do not let him inside your head right now. You need to rest. You need to stay steady for the baby. She squeezed my hand, and for a moment I let myself breathe. But the question kept returning with a cold edge. Who had enough information about my duty schedule, my chain of command, my responsibilities, and my vulnerabilities to create a fake federal notice? And each time I asked myself the answer, circled back to the same person, Brett, the man who had always told me I would fail, the man who enjoyed watching me doubt myself, the man who once said he could ruin my career if he wanted. Until that moment, I had always believed it was just another threat meant to keep me small. Lying there in the hospital bed with pain still lingering in my abdomen, I realized it might not have been a threat at all. It might have been a promise he had finally decided to keep. The day after I stabilized, the doctor allowed me to use my phone again. My hands still felt weak and my body ached in slow waves, but the silence in the hospital room made every thought louder. I stared at my phone for a long time before unlocking it. I knew I had to call my mother. I needed to hear her voice, even if part of me feared what that conversation would lead to. I pressed her number and listened to the dial tone. It rang longer than usual. When she finally answered, her voice sounded thin and nervous. Peyton, sweetie, I was just about to call you. I closed my eyes because I knew that tone too well. It was the voice she used when she was hiding something or when Brett was in the room listening. I told her I was in Womack and that I had collapsed at work. She gasped and asked if the baby was all right, and then went silent as if she regretted asking. That was the first sign. She should not have known to ask about the baby. I had not told her. When she had asked about my health a few weeks ago, I avoided the topic on purpose because I knew she would not be able to keep anything from Brett. Yet now she slipped and revealed more than she meant to. I sat up a little even though my abdomen protested. Mom, how did you know I was pregnant? She inhaled sharply and I heard a faint trembling in the receiver. Honey, I just thought maybe you were tired, she said, but it sounded false and rushed. I waited. She never lied well. She fumbled for a few seconds, and I could almost imagine her clutching the phone with both hands while glancing over her shoulder. Then I heard the sound I dreaded. A low, muffled male voice in the background. Something inside me went cold. I knew that voice even when it was barely audible. Brett asked who she was talking to. My mother did not answer fast enough. I heard footsteps, the sound of the phone scraping against something, and then his voice filled my ear. Stronger, louder, too familiar. Peyton. His tone was a twisted blend of forced concern and amusement. I felt my shoulders tense automatically the way they always had when he addressed me directly. I asked how he knew. My voice came out steady, but inside I felt a tremor spreading through my spine. He chuckled. That slow, smug sound he used whenever he felt power. "People talk," he said. "You cannot hide things forever, and the Army needs to check on its officers sometimes." My breath caught. The Army needs to check on its officers. The exact wording in the fake CID letter. My stomach churned. "Brett, what did you do?" He did not answer. Instead, he shifted the conversation as if he were introducing a casual opinion during a family dinner. "You know Peyton babies change careers, especially for women. Some do not come back the same. Some do not come back at all." The implication hit me like a slap. My grip on the phone tightened. He knew. Not just about the pregnancy. He knew about the investigation letter. He knew enough to hint at its content. He had chosen those words to watch me break. I felt my pulse climb. I reminded myself to breathe slowly, but it was impossible. Every sentence he spoke created another tight knot in my chest. "You worked hard for your position," he continued. "Maybe too hard. Maybe you forgot that you are still human. Maybe someone needed to remind you." His voice was calm and smooth, like he was telling me the weather. Beneath that calm was the same cruelty I had grown up with, the same satisfaction he got from watching someone flinch. "Brett, tell me the truth. Did you send that letter?" Silence. Heavy. Purposeful. Then he said, "It is not about the letter, Peyton. It is about reality. And the reality is, I told your mother you are not ready for a child. You can barely handle family as it is. How will you handle being responsible for another life?" My body reacted before my mind could. A sharp pain shot through my abdomen. Not as intense as the collapse, but enough to make me inhale sharply. He heard the breath, and it delighted him. He continued in a lower tone. "A child will ruin everything you worked for. Do you understand? You are not built for this." The room seemed to tilt. My head throbbed. I looked at the band on my wrist that listed my name and my unborn child. A child he believed he had the right to judge. A child he believed would destroy me. He had always done this. Twisted hope into fear. Twisted ambition into failure. Twisted my confidence until I doubted who I was. Even as an adult, even as an officer, even as someone who led soldiers and secured bases and enforced law. I could feel the 14-year-old version of myself shrinking at the sound of his voice. That shrinking feeling was his greatest weapon. Mom tried to interrupt him in the background, telling him to give her the phone back. She sounded shaky and small. I heard him say, "Let me talk to her. She needs to hear this. She needs to understand consequences." That word again. Consequences. He had used it all my life, when he wanted me silent, when he wanted me obedient, when he wanted to remind me that he controlled the outcome of every argument, even the ones I had not started. I forced myself to breathe and said, "I am ending this call." His tone sharpened. "Do not run, Peyton. You always run. You ran to the Army because you could not handle real life. Now you are pretending you can handle a baby. And one day you will thank me for stopping you before you destroy yourself." My hand shook. My chest tightened. A wave of anger rose inside me so strong it almost burned away the fear. I said, "You do not get to decide what I can handle. Not now. Not ever. And you will never speak about my child again." Another silence. Heavy. Poisonous. Then a soft, almost mocking laugh. "Oh, Peyton, you still do not understand. I can protect you from the outside world. The Army cannot." That sentence was too close to the threat he once made years ago. "I can ruin your career if I want to." I ended the call. My entire body trembled, not from fear alone, but from realization. He had known. He had planned this, and if he had planned it, he had not finished. The thought settled inside me like ice. My mind began to spiral again, and I pressed my hands against my stomach, trying to calm the storm inside. Brett had crossed into my life again, this time with precision, this time with intent. And the worst part was the question I could not escape. How far was he willing to go? The morning after the phone call, I walked into the CID office at Fort Liberty with the envelope in my hand and a knot in my stomach that felt carved from stone. The building was quiet in the early hours, fluorescent lights casting a pale glow across the tiled floor. I had walked these halls many times before for routine coordination between military police and CID, but never as someone seeking answers that could dismantle my entire understanding of what was happening around me. The receptionist looked up, and her expression shifted when she saw my lack of color. I told her I needed to speak to an agent immediately, and she led me to a small briefing room with walls the color of sand and a table that felt colder than the air in the room. Moments later, 2 agents entered. Special Agent Reeves, whom I had worked with on a domestic case last year, and a younger agent whose name tag read Carson. Reeves greeted me with calm professionalism and asked what brought me in. I placed the manila envelope on the table and pushed it toward him. He slid on a pair of gloves, opened it, and began studying the documents with an expression that slowly tightened. Carson leaned in, looking over his shoulder. When Reeves finished the first page, he looked at me with the kind of seriousness that tells you something is very wrong. "Lieutenant Ward, who gave this to you." His voice was controlled, but sharp. I explained everything. The envelope on my desk, the immediate stress, the collapse, the hospital. Reeves listened without interrupting, except for a brief moment when Carson exhaled sharply as if something clicked in his mind. Reeves finished reading the packet and set it down. His jaw shifted slightly before he spoke. "The letterhead is correct. The formatting is mostly accurate. The seal is the kind we use. But the signature is not mine or Mercer's. It is fake." My throat tightened. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls had moved closer. Carson pointed to a line on the second page and said, "Whoever forged this had access to the right templates. This is not something a random person could put together on their kitchen table." Reeves nodded. "Someone studied our formatting. Someone studied our workflow. Someone wanted this to look real enough to scare you." I felt a cold tremor move through my hands. I clasped them together under the table so they would not shake as visibly. The thought that someone had gone to such lengths to imitate a federal document made my skin prickle. This was not just harassment. This was designed, precise, targeted. Reeves continued. "And we have no investigation open on you, Lieutenant. None. Nothing even pending. You have a clean record, and there is no reason for CID to contact you with anything," Carson added. "And even if there were something formal, we would never communicate solely by packet. We would notify command first, and you would be summoned in person. This is completely outside protocol." Hearing those words should have brought relief, but instead they deepened the dread. If CID had not created the letter, then someone had crossed a line far more serious than I initially allowed myself to believe. I nodded slowly, but my breath still felt shallow. Reeves watched me carefully, studying the way my shoulders tightened. "Lieutenant," he asked, "have you had any conflicts recently? Anyone who might want to damage your reputation?" I hesitated. My mind flashed back to Brett, the phone call, his voice dripping with satisfaction, his belief that he could control my life even from hours away. I said there is someone who knows my career and knows enough to hurt me. Someone who has threatened to ruin my life before. Reeves leaned forward. "Civilian or military?" "Civilian," I said. "My stepfather." The silence in the room changed. Both agents exchanged a look that was small but meaningful. Reeves asked, "How much does he know about your work?" "Too much," I said. "More than he should. He knows my rank, my duties, and the chain of command structure because he asked questions for years. He also knew I was pregnant, even though I never told him." The words felt bitter leaving my mouth. Reeves tapped the page again. "That is enough motive for us to look deeper. Forging a federal investigation document is not a prank. It is a felony. It is impersonation of a federal investigator. It is forgery. And if it caused you medical harm, that becomes another layer entirely." My heart pounded. They understood. They took it seriously. Carson began gathering the papers and said, "We will need to keep these for evidence. We will also need a formal statement. Reeves looked at me again with a calm weight that felt grounding. Lieutenant, someone targeted you. Purposefully. Whoever did this wanted you to break. Whoever did this wanted you to panic. My hands trembled again. I clasped them tighter. He continued, and based on the accuracy of this formatting, they understand our system enough to be dangerous. My mouth felt dry. I asked, "What happens now?" Reeves answered, "We open a real case. Forgery of federal documents. Impersonation of a federal investigator. Attempted fraud. Harassment. Possibly more depending on what we uncover. We will start by tracing the origin of the letter and examining anyone with knowledge of your military role." I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. Relief mixed with terror. Terror because this was real. Relief because at least I was not losing my mind. Someone had done this to me. Someone had reached into my life with intent. Reeves spoke again, softer this time. "We will get to the bottom of this, Lieutenant, but I need you to understand something important. Whoever did this is not guessing. They know you. They know us. They know how to mimic a system that most civilians never even glimpse. Someone put time into this, planning, studying, executing. That level of effort means something personal. That sentence wrapped around me like cold wire. Something personal. I already knew the name circling in my thoughts. Brett. His disdain for the Army, his obsession with control, his craving for power, the way he enjoyed watching me crumble. Standing up from the chair felt like lifting 100 pounds. Reeves walked me to the door and said, "We will contact you as soon as we have updates. Stay close to your support network, and please do everything in your power to reduce stress. For you and for your child." His final words struck the center of my chest. I nodded and walked out into the morning air, feeling like the world had shifted. I was no longer just a soldier dealing with a forged document. I was prey being watched by someone who knew exactly where to strike, someone who wanted me cornered, someone who wanted me scared. And the worst part was knowing he had succeeded. 2 days after my visit to CID, I thought things would calm down, but rumors moved through a battalion faster than wildfire in dry brush. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a message from the battalion adjutant ordering me to report to HQ immediately. The tone was formal and clipped, which told me this was not a routine check-in. My stomach tightened as I walked across the parade field toward the battalion building. A few soldiers who normally nodded politely avoided my eyes. 2 specialists whispered as I passed, and one of them quickly looked away, pretending to study the ground. I felt the beginnings of heat gather at the back of my neck. Something had gotten out. The moment I stepped inside HQ, the air felt charged like the tension before a thunderstorm. First, Sergeant Hale was standing near the operations desk talking to a staff sergeant, but as soon as he saw me, his expression shifted into something guarded. He motioned for me to follow and led me toward the conference room. As we walked, I heard fragments of conversation from offices and hallways. "Lieutenant Ward is under CID investigation. Did you hear about the packet? Something about misconduct." The words hit harder than I expected, tightening around my ribs. Hale gestured for me to sit, then closed the door behind him. He lowered his voice. "Ma'am, there have been some concerns raised. Word is spreading that you are involved in a CID matter." He paused, giving me a chance to explain, but my throat felt tight. I forced myself to speak. "First Sergeant, the packet was fake. I took it to CID. They confirmed it. It was forged." He frowned. "Fake? Ma'am, are you sure?" I pulled out the CID receipt confirming they had taken the documents for evidence. He read it and exhaled slowly. "I can handle rumors if they are false," he said, "but soldiers are already talking and we need to get ahead of this." My chest throbbed as I nodded. Sitting upright felt like holding a weight against my spine. He told me the command team wanted to speak with me. My palms grew damp. Having to walk in front of them not as an MP officer reporting on an incident, but as someone defending my own integrity made the floor feel unsteady beneath my feet. When the commander arrived, he listened quietly as I explained the situation from the beginning. My voice stayed steady, but inside I felt a sharp trembling that refused to settle. He told me he appreciated the transparency and that he would wait for CID's formal report before issuing any battalion-wide communication. That should have made me feel supported. Instead, I felt something inside me sink. Because even without an official statement, rumors can stain a reputation. When I left the conference room, a few NCOs lingered near the hallway. One of them, Staff Sergeant Mercer, a man who prided himself on blunt honesty, looked at me with a strange mix of curiosity and disappointment. He asked, "So is it true, ma'am? CID looking at you for misconduct." The question was careless and sharp, like pressing a thumb against a half-healed wound. My breath caught. I managed, "No, Sergeant. It is not true." But he was already glancing at another NCO, raising an eyebrow as if deciding whether to believe me. That moment cracked something in me. The idea that I had spent years building trust within this unit, only to watch it splinter in seconds, made my chest feel hollow. I turned away before my voice could betray how much it hurt. When I stepped outside into the sunlight, the brightness felt harsh. I made it halfway across the parking lot when my phone buzzed. A text message from Brett. The sender name alone sent a surge of nausea through me. I opened it. The words burned instantly. "I told you, you are not fit to be a mother. You are not fit to wear that uniform." My knees weakened. I grabbed the doorframe of a parked Humvee to steady myself. My vision flickered at the edges like a camera lens struggling to focus. My pulse began to pound in my ears, drowning out the sounds around me. I read the message again, even though the first time had already carved deep. "You are not fit to be a mother. You are not fit to wear that uniform." The two things I cared about most twisted together into a single blade. My stomach lurched. I leaned forward, and everything inside me heaved upward violently. I vomited onto the pavement, unable to stop the force of it. My hands braced against my knees as my body shook. A few soldiers nearby froze, unsure whether to approach. I heard one whisper, "Is she okay?" Another said, "That message must have been bad." They did not know. They could not know. The world blurred into sharp shapes and light. My abdomen tightened painfully. For a moment, I could not hear anything except the rising rush of panic in my chest. The humiliation of throwing up in uniform in public should have bothered me, but it didn't. What gutted me was the realization that Brett knew exactly when to strike. He knew when I was vulnerable. He knew how to break me without raising his voice. My phone buzzed again, but I could not bring myself to look. My breathing turned shallow and fast. I tried to straighten, but dizziness swept over me in waves. I gripped the side of the vehicle again, waiting for the spinning to slow, but it only grew worse. Brooke's voice cut through the haze. "LT, Lieutenant Ward." She ran toward me, her boots pounding against the asphalt. She put a hand on my shoulder, guiding me to sit on the curb. I must have looked pale because her face filled with alarm. "What happened? Did something trigger you?" I tried to answer, but my throat closed and my chest tightened again. I could only hand her my phone. She read the message, and her eyes flashed with anger. She crouched beside me like a shield. "Ma'am, he cannot talk to you like this. You need to report this. You need to breathe. Focus on me." I tried, but the world kept slipping. Each breath felt thinner than the last. Brooks placed her hand on my back, anchoring me. She spoke firmly. "We are going to the clinic right now. You do not have to pretend you are okay. Not today." I nodded weakly, and she helped me stand. Each step felt like walking through water. Slow, heavy, unstable. As we moved toward her Jeep, my mind replayed Brett's words on a loop, twisting tighter with each repetition. "You are not fit to be a mother. You are not fit to wear that uniform." The pain in my chest spread lower into my abdomen. Something felt wrong. I did not know then that this was the moment that would push everything beyond the point of return. I only knew that the ground beneath my feet no longer felt safe, and neither did my own body. I should have gone straight to Womack with Brooks that afternoon, but something inside me insisted I needed a moment alone to breathe before stepping into another clinic room filled with questions I was not ready to answer. I told her I only needed 5 minutes and asked her to drop me off near the MP building so I could pull myself together. She hesitated but nodded. The moment she drove off, the dizziness hit me again, but I forced myself inside the building and went straight to the restroom at the end of the hallway. I locked the door and leaned over the sink, gripping the cold porcelain until my knuckles whitened. My reflection in the mirror looked like someone I did not recognize. Pale skin, hollow eyes, trembling lips. My uniform blouse clung to me damp with sweat. My pulse thudded against my throat. I splashed water on my face, but the second I bent forward, a violent cramp tore through my abdomen so sharp it made my breath snap. I froze, gripping the counter. The pain spread downward in a wave so intense I nearly dropped to my knees. I staggered toward the stall and barely managed to close the door before the next contraction hit. My hands shook uncontrollably as I lowered myself to the toilet seat. A warm, thick sensation flowed between my legs. When I looked down and saw the first streak of red, my entire world narrowed to a single point of terror. No, please, no. I whispered the words, but they felt useless. The bleeding intensified, and another cramp struck so forceful it made me cry out. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. My body slid to the tile floor, and I curled onto my side, instinctively protecting my abdomen even though I knew I was already losing the fight. The room tilted. My ears rang. My breath came in panicked gasps. I fumbled for my phone, but my vision blurred so badly I could not find the screen. I collapsed fully on the floor, the cold tile pressing against my cheek. Tears blurred everything. I tried to call Brooks, but my fingers failed me. Another surge of pain tore through me like something ripping from the inside. I screamed, but the sound came out broken and weak. I do not know how long I lay there before someone outside knocked on the door. They called my name, but I could not answer. The bleeding kept coming faster and heavier. My hands slipped through it, trying to grip the floor. My uniform soaked in it. Then the door burst open. I heard shouting voices, footsteps panic. Someone knelt beside me. "Lieutenant Ward, stay with me." It sounded like Corporal Jensen. He lifted my head gently and called for medics. Everything else blurred into noise. I remember being lifted onto a gurney, the ceiling lights spinning above me like disjointed stars. The hallway echoed with boots and radios. My body convulsed with another wave of pain. I remember crying out, my baby, please," and feeling someone squeeze my hand. I remember cold air hitting my skin as they rushed me into the ambulance. My eyes rolled back, and I could not hold them open anymore. I woke up in the ICU under harsh white lights. The room hummed softly with machines. My body felt heavy numb, like I was underwater. I blinked until the shapes sharpened. A doctor stood beside my bed reading something on a tablet. When she noticed I was awake, she set it down slowly and stepped closer. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. A practiced, gentle grief professionals carry for moments like this. "Lieutenant Ward, I am very sorry." The words drifted toward me, but they felt distant. My heart pounded in a slow, suffocating rhythm. She continued, "Your placenta detached, a placental abruption. The bleeding was severe. You lost consciousness in transit. We did everything we could." I heard the words, but they hit me one by one in delayed, painful pulses. Severe. Lost consciousness. We did everything. The next words destroyed me. The baby is gone. My throat closed so tightly I could not breathe. I felt the air leave my lungs in a silent scream. Every part of me began to shake as if my body were breaking apart from the inside. The doctor touched my forearm, gently grounding me. She spoke softly but clearly. "This was not your fault. Stress can cause complications, but this was not something you could have controlled." I shook my head, sobbing so hard it hurt. My hands pressed against my abdomen as if I could somehow bring back what had been taken. My baby, my child, the tiny life I had whispered to every night, the tiny heartbeat I had heard on the ultrasound, gone because of stress designed and delivered by a man who claimed to be family. The doctor stayed with me until my breathing steadied into painful shivers. She told me they would monitor me through the night and that counseling services were available if I needed them. Her voice never wavered, even when mine failed completely. When she finally stepped away, I stared at the ceiling, feeling like something inside me had been hollowed out, leaving only ache behind. I tried to move, but the emptiness in my abdomen felt heavier than any physical pain. The IV line tugged gently at my arm, and the monitor beeped in steady rhythm, mocking the chaos inside my chest. A nurse entered quietly and adjusted my blankets. She hesitated, then asked softly, "Do you want someone to sit with you?" I shook my head weakly. I wanted silence. I wanted darkness. I wanted the world to stop spinning long enough for me to understand how I had ended up here. But as the nurse turned to leave, I whispered, "Please, stay." She nodded, pulled a chair closer, and sat beside my bed with her hands folded in her lap. She said nothing. She did not have to. Her presence alone felt like the only warm thing left in the room. Tears slid down my cheeks again, quietly and endlessly. I felt as if every breath cracked something open inside me. The realization settled like ash. My child died because of a lie designed to break me. A lie sent by a man who had always taken pleasure in watching me fall. And for the first time since the day he entered my life, something inside me began to shift. Grief and horror filled the hollow space in my chest, but beneath it, something darker and colder began to form. Something that would not let this end here. Something that would not let him walk away from what he had done. Something sharpened by loss and born from the deepest wound a person can suffer. I had nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. When I woke again, the room was dimmer and quieter, like the entire ICU had taken a breath it was afraid to release. My mouth felt dry and my eyes burned as if I had been crying even in sleep. For a long moment, I did not remember where I was or why the world felt so unbearably heavy. Then the memories surged all at once. The restroom floor, the blood, the pain, the voices, and the doctor saying words I never thought would be directed at me. The baby is gone. The weight of that sentence pressed down on my chest again until I could barely inhale. I stared at the ceiling because looking anywhere else felt impossible. The ache in my abdomen pulsed in slow, cruel reminders. I tried to swallow, but it felt like something was lodged in my throat. I do not know how long I lay there before I heard soft footsteps. Someone slid into the chair beside me. For a second, I thought it was the nurse, but then I heard the voice that anchored me more than any medication could. LT Peyton. It was Brooks. I turned my head slightly and saw her sitting forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped together like she was holding herself steady. Her eyes were red-rimmed but alert. She must have been there a while. She spoke quietly but firmly. "Peyton, I am here. You are not alone." Her words cracked something inside me, and tears spilled hot and silent down my temples. I managed to whisper, "Where is my baby?" even though I already knew the answer. Her jaw tightened with grief and anger and something protective that made her look like she wished she could go to war for me right then. She leaned closer. "Pay, sweetheart, I am so sorry." I wanted to deny it again, but the emptiness inside me felt too real, too consuming. It wrapped around my ribs like cold hands. I covered my face with shaking fingers and sobbed. Deep, broken sobs that came from somewhere raw and bottomless. Brooks reached out and placed her hand gently on my forearm, grounding me without pity. She waited until the worst of the sobbing faded. When I finally looked at her through blurred vision, she said something that cut through the fog in a way nothing else had. "This was not your fault. Do you hear me, Pay? This was not you. Someone did this. Someone pushed you to the edge on purpose. Someone has to answer for what happened here." Her tone was steady, but I could hear the fire beneath it. She was angry in a way I had never seen her before. Not reckless anger, but righteous fury, the kind that rises when something sacred has been taken. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, even though it did nothing to stop the next wave of tears. Brooks continued, "You have always carried things alone, Pay. Always. But you are not carrying this alone. What happened to you cannot be buried under silence." My throat felt raw when I spoke. I said I should have been stronger. I should have handled the stress better. She shook her head sharply. "No, do not do that to yourself. Do not give whoever did this the power to rewrite the truth. You were attacked. Maybe not physically, but you were attacked. And now there is a cost. The word cost felt brutal because it was true in the worst possible way. I placed my hand on my abdomen and closed my eyes. I had imagined the future. I had imagined holding my child, meeting them, counting tiny fingers, listening to tiny breaths, feeling that fierce love people talked about. Now all of it felt like a dream, ripped apart in the middle of the night, leaving only shreds behind. Brooks watched me with a look I had only seen once before when a young private lost his life on patrol. She said, "Pay, you need to fight back. Not today, not in this moment, but when you can stand again, you need to fight. Not for revenge, for truth, for accountability, for the life that was taken from you." I stared at her. Something inside me shifted, a fragile, tiny spark fighting to stay alive inside the wreckage. For the first time since the miscarriage, I felt something other than pain. I felt anger. Not the explosive kind, but the quiet, sharp kind that forms when grief reaches its breaking point. The kind that makes you realize you cannot remain curled on the ground forever. The kind that turns wounds into resolve. I whispered Brett's name. Even saying it made my stomach twist. Brooks nodded as if she had expected it. He did this, Pay. Maybe not with his hands, but with his cruelty. He pushed you past the point any human should bear. You cannot let him walk away from that. I sighed, shaking. I do not have proof. Not enough. She leaned closer. That is what CID is for. And they already believe this was targeted. You gave them the packet. They will find the rest. But it starts with you refusing to be silent. That word silent echoed inside me. Silence was what Brett had always counted on. Silence was what he fed on. Silence was what he had used to control me since I was 14 years old. And silence was what had finally cost me my child. I wiped the tears off my cheeks, slow and deliberate, like I was wiping away the last traces of the girl who let him decide who she was allowed to be. Brooks squeezed my hand. "When you are ready," she said, "we go to CID again. We give a full statement. We make sure they know exactly who had motive to break you." I nodded slowly. The movement felt fragile but real. For the first time in days, my breath came without collapsing halfway. The pain was still there, the emptiness still raw, but beneath it a decision began to form. I could not bring my child back. I could not undo the loss. But I could make sure the person responsible never had the chance to hurt me again. I opened my eyes. They felt different, clearer, harder. Brooks must have seen the change because she exhaled like she had been waiting for that moment. She whispered softly, "That's it, Pay. That is the strength I know." And as the monitors hummed quietly and the ICU lights glowed against the walls, I felt something solid return to me. Not hope. Not yet. But resolve. Resolve that would carry me through whatever came next. Resolve that would not let Brett Coleman rewrite the story of my life or the memory of the child I lost. I would not be silent anymore. 2 days after I woke in the ICU, they discharged me to a quiet recovery wing and cleared me for limited movement. My body felt like it had aged 20 years overnight, but my mind was sharper than it had been since the day the fake investigation notice showed up. On the morning of the 3rd day, an MP specialist delivered a printed memo to my bedside stating that CID wanted a formal interview as soon as I was medically stable. The signature at the bottom belonged to Special Agent Marcus Hill, a name I recognized from countless security briefings. I felt a cold tightening in my chest, but I told the nurse I was ready. If I waited any longer, I would lose whatever strength I had built overnight. They wheeled me down to a small conference room inside Womack with pale lights and a table too large for the 3 of us. Special Agent Hill and a junior agent named Rivera were waiting. Their expressions were professional, but I caught a flicker of something human behind their eyes when they saw the hospital wristband still around my arm. Agent Hill introduced himself with a calm, low voice and then said, "Lieutenant Ward, before we begin, I want to say we are very sorry for your loss. We intend to take this investigation seriously." His tone told me he meant it. That was the first time since the miscarriage that someone in authority acknowledged what had happened as part of something bigger, not just a medical tragedy, but a consequence of harm. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Agent Rivera set a recorder on the table, She asked if I consented to the interview being recorded. I said yes. My hands shook a little, but I folded them on my lap to hide it. Agent Hill leaned forward. "Lieutenant, we need you to tell us everything you remember from the moment you received the letter to the moment you were admitted to Womack. Take your time." I began at the very beginning, describing the envelope, the seal, the fake signature, the precise formatting that looked too real to be amateur work. I told them about the cold heaviness in my chest and the nausea that started the moment I read the allegation. I recapped the conversation with my commander, the rumors, the humiliating stares, the moment I collapsed in the restroom. By the time I reached the part about the miscarriage, my throat had closed up completely, and I paused, pressing a hand against my sternum, as if the pressure might slow the ache radiating outward. Agent Rivera waited until I steadied myself before continuing with careful, measured questions. She asked if anyone outside the Army had access to information about where I worked or my role in the military police corps, anyone who might hold resentment, anger, a motive. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes were searching. I answered with the truth. Yes, my stepfather, Brett Coleman. Their pens stopped moving at the same time. Agent Hill looked up. "What is he to you?" His tone was different. Not curious, focused, intentional. I inhaled slowly. He raised me, and that was all I needed to say, because the moment those words left my mouth, everything about the room changed. It was like the air thickened with a new understanding. Agent Rivera straightened visibly, and Agent Hill exchanged a glance with her before he asked, "Tell us more about your relationship with Mr. Coleman." I explained everything I had never wanted to say out loud to anyone in uniform. The comments, the attempts to undermine my career, the way he mocked the Army every chance he had, the threats he used when I was younger, the variations of, "You think you are strong, but I can break you," and then the recent conversation where he told me I was not fit to wear a uniform or become a mother. Saying the words out loud made my skin prickle like I was peeling open a wound, but CID did not flinch. They just listened. Agent Rivera tapped her pen once, then said, "Lieutenant Ward, the notice you received was created using authentic Department of the Army routing templates and a real CID letterhead watermark that is not publicly available." I stared at her. I felt my stomach drop. That meant the document was not made by guessing or copying something online. Someone had studied the system carefully. Agent Hill continued, "We also did a preliminary review of the digital traces on the packet you provided. The envelope had no fingerprints except yours and the mailroom clerk who handled it. But the tracking code printed on the back is not from our system. It is a counterfeit. A very convincing one." The investigative clarity in his voice made a shiver run down my spine. So someone impersonated a federal authority and forged government documents with enough precision to fool everyone except actual CID agents. He paused, letting the weight of that fact settle into the air. "Lieutenant, that is a federal crime. Impersonation, fraud, harassment, and depending on the outcome of your medical event, possibly criminal negligence." My breath hitched. He said the words without hesitation, as if he already knew what I had lost before the doctors confirmed it. Rivera opened a folder and slid a printed list across the table. "This is a list of individuals who have called your unit or your installation leadership in the past 6 months. Most are routine. 2 are from your mother, but 7 calls came from someone listed as B. Coleman." I felt ice crawl along my spine. 7. Agent Rivera nodded. "And the dates match periods of increased stress in your duty roster and disciplinary rumors that never quite made sense. It appears someone was attempting to disrupt your professional standing." My pulse hammered in my ears. I leaned back, gripping the armrest of the wheelchair. Agent Hill folded his hands. "Lieutenant, we are opening a full investigation. Not just a check, a case file. We will be contacting civilian authorities in Wilmington. We will obtain warrants if necessary. We need you to confirm one more thing. Do you believe your stepfather had motive to harm your career or your emotional stability?" The room seemed to shrink around me. My throat tightened, but this time with clarity, not fear. I remembered every sneer, every attempt to belittle my service, every time he said the Army had taken me away from family as if I owed him something. I remembered the call where he told me I did not deserve to be a mother. I remembered the sound of his voice the day he found out I enlisted as though I had betrayed him personally. I looked at Agent Hill directly. Yes, he has motive. He has always had motive. Hill nodded slowly like a piece of a puzzle had just clicked firmly into place. Very well, we will proceed. The formal case number was assigned that afternoon. Rivera read it aloud and wrote it onto the file. It felt strangely like the first brick laid in a path I did not know how to walk yet, but knew I needed to. When the interview ended, Hill paused at the door. Lieutenant, one last question. Did anyone besides your family know you were pregnant? I hesitated, then shook my head. Only my mother, and Brett overheard. The change in his expression was almost imperceptible, but it carried meaning. Thank you for your honesty. We will be in touch soon. As they escorted me back to the room, I felt something unfamiliar rising inside me. Not hope exactly, but validation. Someone finally believed me. Someone finally saw the pattern I had been trapped under for years, and for the first time since losing my child, I felt a thin, unwavering line of resolve begin to form in my chest. Brett Coleman had always relied on my silence. But CID had just given me something stronger than fear. They had given me a voice, and I intended to use it. 3 days after the formal interview, CID notified me that they were expanding the investigation and coordinating with civilian authorities in Wilmington. I was still on limited movement orders, recovering physically while the emotional damage carved itself deeper each night. On the morning of September 12th, a soft knock sounded on my hospital door and Agent Rivera stepped inside, holding a tablet pressed against her chest like it carried a verdict. Lieutenant Ward, we have preliminary results, she said. My pulse lifted instantly. She moved a chair closer to my bed and lowered her voice. We traced the digital origin of the email linked to the forged CID notice. The IP address points to a residential line in Wilmington registered under the name Brett Coleman. For a moment, there was no air in the room. I had expected it, feared it, but hearing it confirmed still felt like stepping through ice. Rivera continued. The fake document was created using software that mimics federal formatting systems. The seal was manually constructed using high-resolution stock images and layered textures. This was not amateur work. Whoever did it studied real documents. I swallowed hard, feeling my stomach twist. Brett barely knows how to use his phone. The idea of him mastering document forgery software made no sense. Unless someone had shown him, unless he cared enough to learn just to ruin me. Rivera must have read the confusion on my face because she added, Lieutenant Spite can be a powerful teacher. We also have something else. CID and Wilmington PD had executed a search warrant at Brett's house that morning. They found a laptop on his desk with remnants of the graphics program used to replicate the CID seal. They found printed drafts of the fake notice in his office trash can, including one version where he misspelled my name and crossed it out. They found matching envelopes and watermark paper. Every word she said felt like another punch, but also a strange vindication. It was exactly what I feared, yet more calculated than I ever imagined. My stepfather did not stumble into this. He built it. Rivera pulled up a few scanned images on her tablet. Envelope fragments. A practice signature where he had attempted to copy the autograph of the special agent in charge by tracing it against a window. A screenshot showing the document template being edited. All of it tied to him. Then she showed me the last image a photo Wilmington PD had taken of Brett as officers served the warrant. He was standing on his porch in a wrinkled shirt with a look of outraged indignation as though he was the victim, not the perpetrator. My throat tightened. Rivera said, He denied everything, of course, claimed he was being targeted, claimed he had no idea how any of this material ended up in his house, claimed someone must be framing him. I let out a shaky breath. That sounded exactly like Brett. She nodded. He said you have always exaggerated and that you probably set him up to get back at him. He said he is a victim of your unstable tendencies. I felt heat flare behind my eyes. That was his pattern his entire life. Anytime he hurt someone, he turned himself into the wounded one. Anyone who challenged him became the problem. Rivera shook her head slightly. But, Lieutenant, he cannot spin his way out of this. The evidence is overwhelming. His digital footprint, his printed drafts, the envelope batch numbers, the software logs, it is all him. My mind swirled with too many thoughts at once. The relief of validation, the anger at his audacity, the grief that this was real, not paranoia, not exaggeration, but deliberate harm, and the crushing thought that his obsession with controlling me had contributed to losing my child. Rivera continued. He is being summoned for a formal interview with Wilmington detectives and with us next week at Fort Liberty. You will not be required to be present, but you have the right to attend if you want. Just hearing that option made my pulse pound. I did not know if I could stomach being in the same room with him, or if I needed to look him in the eye to reclaim something that he had taken from me. Later that afternoon, Agent Hill visited to walk me through the law enforcement side. He explained that forging federal documents, impersonating a federal investigator, and intentionally disseminating fraudulent legal accusations could carry serious charges, especially when the victim was an active duty officer whose health had been directly impacted. He did not mention the miscarriage directly, but the weight of it sat between us anyway. I asked, "How did he even know how to do all this?" Hill exhaled through his nose. He researched. He accessed public guides on government formatting. He downloaded trial versions of specialized software. He studied the names and roles of CID leadership at Fort Liberty. He even practiced writing the signature multiple times. My stomach churned. So he planned it for weeks. Hill nodded, possibly months. We are still analyzing timelines. A cold tremor moved through me. All those weeks he acted normal, calling my mother, pretending nothing was unusual, and the entire time he was crafting a weapon aimed at me. Hill leaned forward. Lieutenant, this was not impulsive. This was deliberate, targeted, and malicious. I stared at my hands. The band from my hospital stay was still around my wrist. My fingertips were pale. For the first time since the miscarriage, I felt anger rise clean and precise. Not chaotic, not desperate, controlled, contained. Hill continued. The next step is a structured interview with Mr. Coleman. We expect he will deny everything. We also expect he will claim he acted out of concern for you. My jaw tightened. Concern he had told me I did not deserve to be a mother. He had told me the Army should take me down a notch. Agent Rivera then entered again, bringing an update Wilmington detectives had just finished questioning Brett. As predicted, he blamed me, saying I am dramatic, saying I always try to make him look bad, saying I probably forged the documents myself to ruin his life. I laughed once, a brittle, humorless sound. Classic Brett. Rivera lifted her chin. But when detectives asked him how his fingerprints ended up on the practice drafts, he suddenly had no explanation. When they asked why the software license trial had been activated on his laptop, he said he was hacked. When they asked why his handwriting sample matched the traced signature, he said he must have been set up. Every lie was worse than the last. Then she added quietly, "There was one more thing." In his trash can, police found a torn scrap of paper with my name on it and the words "unfit mother" underlined twice. My heart squeezed painfully. It was like seeing the inside of his mind scribbled in ink, the part he never said out loud but always meant. Rivera placed her tablet on the table. "Lieutenant, the case is moving faster than expected. He will be served with a formal notice to appear in federal court within the next month. You will have an opportunity to submit a victim impact statement." I sat back, slowly absorbing everything. The proof, the lies, the unraveling of his story, the undeniable fact that he had weaponized federal imagery just to break me. For a long moment, I could not speak. Then finally, I whispered, "Why did he hate me enough to do this?" Hill answered with steady calm, "Because you left his control. People like him do not forgive that." As they left the room, I looked toward the window where evening sunlight stretched across the wall. Something inside me shifted. The grief was still there, the raw wound still open, but now something stronger was rising in its place, a sense of clarity, a demand for justice. For my child, for my career, for every year I had lived under Brett's shadow. The truth had finally stepped into the light, and for the first time in my life, the consequences were coming for him, not for me. 3 weeks after CID confirmed everything the battalion announced in all-hands forum in the main auditorium, I had been back on limited duty for a few days, still moving carefully, still attending medical appointments, still waking up in the middle of the night with the hollow feeling where my child should have been growing. The invitation to attend the forum made my stomach tighten. These gatherings usually focused on training updates, safety briefs, holiday guidelines. But this time the email included a short line that made my pulse jump battalion-level update on an ongoing CID-assisted investigation, no names disclosed. It was the phrasing that told me everything. CID did not mention investigations publicly unless it was meant to stop rumors cold or reinforce policy changes. My hands shook slightly as I straightened my uniform collar that morning. Sergeant Imani Brooks knocked twice on my open door before stepping in. "You ready, LT?" Her voice was gentle, but carried the firm steadiness she always had when she sensed my nerves thinning. I nodded, though my stomach was knotted so tightly it almost hurt. She walked with me to the auditorium filled with rows of chairs, small clusters of soldiers chatting in low tones, and the faint buzz of anticipation. As we entered, I felt eyes on me, whispers passing between soldiers who had heard pieces of the story, but never the truth. I shook off the tension and took a seat near the front with my unit. My commander, Captain Evans, sat 2 seats down, giving me a silent look of support. The battalion commander, Colonel Harding, stepped to the podium and the room fell silent. He opened with updates about training schedule changes and staffing, but anyone could see the collective impatience waiting for the reason we had all been called. Then Harding paused, his tone shifting. "Finally, we must address an incident that recently impacted one of our officers and required full coordination with CID and civilian law enforcement." The auditorium stilled, as though every breath had been sucked out at once. My spine straightened instinctively. My palms grew cold. A man from the S3 shop stepped forward carrying a folder. He greeted the room, then said, "We want to clarify misinformation circulating about a supposed CID investigation on one of our lieutenants." Several soldiers shifted uneasily. The rumors had been swirling for weeks, whisper networks and snide comments about whether I had been relieved or placed under investigation. The S3 officer continued, "There never was a CID investigation targeting that soldier. Instead, CID uncovered a case involving forged federal documents and impersonation of federal officials." People leaned forward in their seats. The officer flipped a page. "A soldier's stepfather attempted to fabricate legal accusations in order to harm the career of that officer. He used counterfeit letterheads, falsified signatures, and unauthorized federal imagery. The acts resulted in significant emotional distress and a medical emergency." A faint murmur rippled through the room. Then suddenly, as if pulled by a magnet, every pair of eyes shifted toward me. A wave of heat washed across my face and chest. My heartbeat thudded so loudly it drowned out the next few sentences. I sat frozen but lifted my chin, refusing to shrink. Harding stepped back to the microphone. "While we cannot name the soldier involved, it is essential that we all understand the gravity of this event. Someone outside this uniform attempted to weaponize our systems against one of our own. We do not tolerate that. We protect our soldiers." Another wave of whispers moved through the room, and again every gaze settled on me. Some eyes were wide with shock, some with sympathy, some with guilt for having believed the rumors. In the third row, I saw a staff sergeant who had once asked me if the rumors were true, look away with visible regret. My throat tightened, but I kept breathing slow, deliberate breaths. Then Colonel Harding said, "If the soldier involved wishes to address the battalion, they may do so." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. The auditorium seemed too quiet, too expectant. My muscles trembled. Then slowly, deliberately, I rose from my chair. The scrape of the seat echoed loud enough to make several soldiers straighten. I felt Imani shift beside me, ready to steady me if my knees buckled, but I stepped into the aisle and walked toward the front. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room. Not judgment, not pity, just attention. Real attention. I stopped beside the podium. Harding stepped back, letting me stand where the light hit my face. My heart pounded so hard I could almost taste the metallic edge of adrenaline. Hundreds of soldiers stared, waiting for me to speak. I inhaled once, deep enough to steady the quake inside me. Then I said clearly, I will not be controlled anymore. The words left my mouth with a strength I did not know I still had. They felt like they rose from every year of silence, every bruise left on my confidence, every threat, every insult, every time Brett tried to crush me, and every moment I thought I had to endure it. The room stayed silent for a heartbeat, then two, the kind of silence that vibrates like a string pulled too tight. Then something shifted. Soldiers began to nod. One or two murmured quietly. I saw empathy on faces I never expected to understand mine. I saw some officers straighten with protective pride. I saw younger soldiers glance at each other as if realizing toxic behavior from family members was a real enemy too. I stood there for a full 10 seconds, letting the moment settle into my bones. Imani behind me whispered softly, "That is right, Pay." Then Colonel Harding stepped forward again and said, "Lieutenant, thank you for your strength. The battalion stands with you." The way he said it felt like the room exhaled as one. He closed the forum with a reminder about integrity and the responsibility to look out for each other even off duty. But the message of the day had already been delivered. When the meeting ended, soldiers approached me in small, hesitant waves. Some offered a quiet, "I am sorry you went through that." Some said, "If you need anything, ma'am, we are here." Others simply gave a respectful nod. No pity, just respect. Real respect. As I walked out of the auditorium into the sunlit courtyard, a strange sensation settled inside me. For weeks, I had been drowning under the weight of shame, humiliation, loss, and fear. But there, in front of the battalion with the truth laid bare, the weight shifted. The humiliation Brett had tried to crush me under had become a spotlight that revealed him, not me. It felt like reclaiming something I did not know I had lost. My voice, my dignity, my place in the uniform I had fought to earn. And as I stepped into the open air, one thought repeated in my mind like a promise to myself: I am done being silent. I am done being controlled. Justice had its first public moment, and everyone in that auditorium had witnessed it. 3 days after the battalion forum, when I thought the worst of the storm had finally passed, my phone rang while I was sitting on the edge of my barracks bed lacing my boots. The caller ID froze my breath. Brett Coleman. For a full 10 seconds, I just stared at the screen, my hands rigid, my mind blank. Something inside me said, "Do not answer." Another voice, the old voice, the trained instinct of a child conditioned to obey, flinched with the familiar fear of his anger if I ignored him. Against my better judgment, I swiped to accept, but held the phone an inch from my ear, like the distance might shield me. His voice came through immediately loud, frantic cracking at the edges. "Peyton, please, listen to me." He sounded like he had been crying for hours, breathless words tumbling over each other. I did not speak. He continued, "I am so sorry for everything that has happened. I did not mean for things to go this far. You have to believe me, sweetheart." My stomach clenched at the word sweetheart. It was not affection. It was a leash he used my entire childhood. He sniffled loudly, then said, "I only wanted the best for you. I was trying to scare you straight. I wanted you to take your career seriously. It was supposed to help you, not hurt you." A long, shaky breath rattled through him. "Your mother is furious. The police embarrassed us. You need to tell them it was a misunderstanding. You need to fix this, Peyton." That was the sentence that snapped everything inside me. Fix this. Because in his world, everything was always my fault, my responsibility. His messes, his cruelty, his sabotage, my problem. I finally raised the phone fully to my ear and said in a calm, steady voice, "I do not owe you anything." He sucked in a sharp breath like he had been slapped. "Peyton, you are being dramatic. I know you are upset about your situation." He could not even bring himself to say the word miscarriage. "But you cannot ruin a man's life over a mistake." My jaw locked so tightly my teeth hurt. Before I could respond, there was a sudden pounding sound on his end of the call, followed by muffled yelling. Then another voice shouted, "Sir, you cannot be here. Step away from the gate." My heart lurched. I stood up instantly. "Brett, where are you?" He answered with rising anger. I am at your base. Where else do you think I would be? I came to talk to you face to face because you will not listen. The MPs won't let me through. These idiots keep telling me I am on some list. Get down here and tell them I am allowed on post. I could hear wind in the phone background cars passing and the metallic echo of someone bickering at a security checkpoint. My pulse raced. I grabbed my patrol cap and rushed out the door, heading toward the vehicle that would take me to the main access point. As I ran down the walkway, I could hear him on the phone continuing his tirade. You are my daughter. I have every right to be here. They cannot keep a father from seeing his own child. A soldier at the desk saw my expression and immediately stood. Ma'am, do you need transportation? I nodded breathlessly. He grabbed the keys and within seconds we were speeding toward the gate. As we approached, I could see a small crowd forming. 2 MPs stood blocking Brett, who was red-faced, flailing his arms, arguing with both of them. He looked wild, unhinged, spitting angry phrases as if volume alone would grant him authority. I stepped out of the vehicle, slowly letting my boots hit the pavement with deliberate calm. The nearer I got, the clearer his words became. I am her father, he shouted, jabbing a finger at the MP sergeant. She is confused right now. She is going through things. She needs me. The sergeant replied firmly, Sir, you are on a barred list. You are not authorized to enter Fort Liberty. Step back immediately. Brett turned at the sound of my footsteps, and the moment he saw me, his face contorted, not with relief, but with righteous indignation. Where have you been? Why are you letting them treat me like this? Get them to move. Tell them I am allowed in. His voice cracked with a mixture of command and desperation. The same tone he used on me when I was 14 and dared to resist him. The same tone that had shaped every fear-filled year of my adolescence. But he did not understand something. That girl no longer existed. I stopped about 10 feet from him, standing straight, shoulders squared, chin lifted. He pointed at me with the trembling fury. Peyton, tell them. Tell them who I am. I looked at him for a long moment, feeling the weight of every manipulation, every lie, every threat, every scar on my conscience he had carved. Then, with a voice cold enough to freeze the air between us, I said, You are nothing to me. The words did not tremble. They did not break. They came out sharp, precise, final. Brett blinked like he needed a moment to process what had just happened. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. For the first time in my life, he was speechless. The MP sergeant seized the moment and stepped forward. Sir, you are hereby ordered to leave the installation immediately. Attempting to force entry will result in arrest. Brett shook his head as if refusing reality. Peyton, you cannot do this. I raised a hand, stopping him. I did not do this. You did. You caused this. Every consequence you are facing is yours, not mine. His face twisted with panic, then anger, then desperation again, as though he scrambled through every mask he owned, trying to find one that would work. None did. The sergeant made a small signal, and the second MP guided Brett backward off the curb line. He resisted for a moment, shouting that he was her father, that he had rights, that this was disrespectful, that the army had turned me against him. But I did not move. I did not answer. I did not give him 1 ounce of the emotional fuel he thrived on. When he finally realized that no one was on his side, that every soldier there stood firmly between him and me, something inside him seemed to collapse. He slumped back, taking several shaky steps toward the parking lot, his voice lowered to a pathetic mutter. You will regret this, Peyton. You always do. He climbed into his truck, slammed the door, and peeled out, leaving a smear of burnt rubber on the pavement. I stood there, eyes fixed on the spot where he had stood. The sergeant turned to me. Ma'am, he is officially barred from Fort Liberty. If he returns, we detain him on site. You will be notified immediately. I nodded once, feeling something heavy and poisonous finally loosen inside me. Watching him fail to force his way into my life felt like watching the chains of my childhood snap one by one. As I walked back toward the vehicle, the wind felt different against my face. Lighter, cleaner. For the first time in years, I was not bracing for his next attack. For the first time, I could breathe without hearing his voice in the back of my mind. He had come to reclaim control. Instead, he had witnessed it die in front of him. The old version of him, the one who used to terrify me, would never have imagined I could look him in the eye and say he was nothing. But I had, and I felt it settle into my chest like armor I should have worn years ago. He was officially barred from the installation, but more importantly, he was barred from my life. Forever. 2 weeks after Brett tried to force his way onto Fort Liberty and failed spectacularly, I received an official briefing memo instructing me to report to the CID building for a major update. By then, I was back to half days on duty, cleared for administrative work, while continuing grief counseling. The walk from the parking lot to the CID doors felt heavier than usual, the thick October air carrying a weight that pressed against my chest. When I stepped inside, Agent Hill and Agent Rivera were waiting with expressions that were difficult to read. Serious, but not grim-focused in a way that suggested something irreversible was about to happen. "Lieutenant Ward, thank you for coming," Hill said. He gestured to the conference room. As soon as the door closed behind us, he lowered a file with a hard thud onto the table. "The Department of Justice has accepted this case." My breath hitched. That was not common. DOJ does not involve itself in personal disputes or family drama. They only touch cases with clear federal implications. Rivera continued, "The charges are now elevated. Your stepfather has been arrested on 2 counts impersonating a federal officer and harassment targeting a federal employee." The terms were clinical, but the meaning hit like a punch. Brett was in custody. The man who terrorized my childhood forged federal documents and created the chain of events that ended with me losing my child was behind bars. I felt a strange sensation somewhere between relief and disbelief. Hill slid the arrest affidavit across the table. Brett had been taken into custody by Wilmington police that morning without incident, but not without spectacle neighbors watching from porches as officers placed him in handcuffs. He apparently shouted that the Army had manipulated the justice system and that he was being punished for trying to help me. It would have been laughable if it had not been so sickening. Rivera then handed me a separate document. This is the protective order request. Given the nature of the case, the medical emergency, and the emotional harm, CID and DOJ are recommending immediate approval. I scanned the text, the words blurring slightly with the pounding of my heart. If granted, the order would prevent him from contacting me, approaching my home, my workplace, or any military installation. He would be legally forbidden from calling, texting, sending letters, or using any third party to communicate, and if he violated it, he would go back to jail. I signed without hesitation. They arranged for a hearing date the following week. My presence was optional, but I chose to attend. Something inside me needed to see it through, not out of vengeance, but out of a need to reclaim the parts of me that Brett had chipped away for years. When the day arrived, the courthouse in Fayetteville felt colder than the autumn weather outside. The walls echoed with the low hum of voices, the shuffle of paperwork, and the muted thuds of doors closing. I walked in wearing my uniform, crisp, pressed, polished boots and ribbons in perfect alignment, not because I wanted to intimidate him, but because I wanted to remind myself of the life I had built outside his control. When I stepped into the courtroom, Brett was already seated at the defense table wearing a wrinkled shirt and looking far smaller than he ever had in my memory. His wrists were no longer cuffed, but the security officers nearby kept a close eye on him. He glanced at me only once, and the flicker of fear that crossed his face told me he had finally understood that control had slipped completely from his hands. The judge entered a stern, middle-aged woman whose reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for manipulation. She began with standard formalities, then turned to the prosecutor, a federal attorney named Ms. Harper, who stood with a stack of documents. "Your Honor, this case concerns an egregious act of impersonation and targeted harassment against a federal officer. The defendant intentionally created falsified federal documents using official formats and insignia with the explicit goal of damaging Lieutenant Ward's career reputation and emotional stability. His actions directly resulted in significant harm, including a medical emergency." The courtroom felt still, like no one dared breathe. As she continued, my hands curled subtly into fists on my lap. Hearing someone else recount the timeline aloud sharpened every memory into a blade. Ms. Harper described the fake CID notice in detail, the forged signature, the counterfeit routing code, the multiple drafts found in Brett's trash. Then she explained the digital trail, the email origin, the software logs, the fingerprints on the practice sheets, the handwriting match, and finally she addressed the part I was bracing for. Your Honor, while we will not be discussing personal medical details in depth, we must state for the record that the emotional and psychological trauma inflicted on Lieutenant Ward culminated in a severe health crisis requiring immediate hospitalization. The judge nodded gravely. Brett's attorney, a man with a thinning hairline and tired eyes, stood quickly as if hoping to interrupt the rhythm of the prosecution. He launched into a familiar speech about misunderstanding and poor judgment, and concern blown out of proportion, but even he sounded unconvinced as the words left his mouth. He argued that Brett had never intended harm, that he was simply trying to warn Peyton about military pitfalls, that he had acted out of misguided love. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I wanted to laugh. Misguided love does not involve forging federal documents or calling my chain of command with false accusations. The judge asked a few clarifying questions, each answer from Brett's attorney falling apart under the weight of the evidence. Then she turned to me. Lieutenant Ward, would you like to make a statement? My heartbeat stuttered. Every part of me trembled, but my voice came out steady. Yes, Your Honor. I stood slowly facing the judge. Not Brett, though I could feel his gaze burning into the side of my face. I explained in calm, even tones what the fake investigation notice had done to me, how it followed years of manipulation and verbal attacks, how it fed every insecurity I already carried, how finding out I was being investigated nearly shattered everything I believed about myself as a soldier, how the rumor mill crushed my reputation, and how the stress spiraled so violently it tore apart the life growing inside me. I did not raise my voice. I did not dramatize anything. I spoke plainly because the truth was devastating enough. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge took a breath, then said, "Thank you, Lieutenant. Please be seated." Brett's attorney tried to counter, but the judge raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I have heard enough." She addressed Brett directly. "Mr. Coleman, your actions were deliberate, malicious, and deeply harmful. You exploited federal imagery to intimidate your stepdaughter, a commissioned officer in the United States Army. You sought to damage her career reputation and emotional well-being. Your behavior shows a disturbing pattern of control and disregard for boundaries, and your actions resulted in significant trauma." She paused, letting the words settle like stones dropped into still water. "The request for a protective order is granted immediately and indefinitely. Additionally, you are ordered to have no contact of any kind with Lieutenant Ward. Any violation will result in immediate arrest and potential federal charges on top of the charges you already face." Brett's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly as if he might protest, but the judge's expression killed any attempt. "Court is adjourned," she said. The gavel cracked once sharp, decisive. As the officers moved toward Brett to escort him out, he turned in my direction, not with anger this time, but with something hollow and pathetic, a quiet plea forming on his lips. But for the first time in my life, I did not feel fear or guilt or doubt, only clarity. He had taken enough from me. He would take nothing more. I stood, walked calmly out of the courtroom, and stepped into the sunlight that spilled across the courthouse steps. The air tasted different. Clean, cold, almost bright. Legal justice had only begun, but the first barrier between us had been built in stone. The protective order was not just a piece of paper. It was a line drawn across years of pain, a line he would never cross again. After the protective order was granted and Brett was escorted out of the courtroom in a defeated slump, I walked back to my vehicle with a strange mix of numbness and clarity spreading through my chest. For the first time in my life, the legal system was no longer a distant authority, but a shield standing between me and him. But as I sat in the driver's seat gripping the steering wheel, I felt something else too, something sharper than relief. A quiet resolve began to settle into the hollow places his abuse had carved inside me. I realized that simply stopping him from contacting me was not enough. Not after what he had done, not after what I had lost. He had spent years tearing at my sense of self, my confidence, my peace. He had spent months planning a federal-level hoax designed specifically to break me at my weakest moment. And now a part of me understood something I had never allowed myself to see. If I did not push back fully, completely strategically, he would find ways to slip through the cracks of the system the way abusers always do. I was done giving him cracks to hide in. That night, after returning to my temporary lodging on post, I sat at my desk and opened a blank folder on my laptop. The blue glow of the screen illuminated the scattered notes my therapist had encouraged me to write, but I had not been ready until now. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for several seconds before I began typing a timeline not of the forged documents or the investigation, but of my entire life with Brett, beginning at 14 when my mother remarried. I wrote about the first time he called me useless, the first time he mocked my interest in the Army, the first time he told me discipline was wasted on girls. I documented every threat disguised as advice, every insult disguised as concern, every moment he used fear to shape my behavior. It felt surreal watching the memories appear in black and white on the screen, memories I had shoved into dark corners for years. I worked until my eyes blurred, then forced myself to keep going. I added the time he threatened to throw away my college applications because the military would make me forget my family. The night he called me at basic training screaming through the phone that I had betrayed him by enlisting. The message he left the day I pinned First Lieutenant, accusing me of choosing the Army over family. And then the recent calls, the fake concern, the manipulative sighs, the cruelty he tried to hide behind paternal authority. The more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. Every interaction, every word, every moment, he treated me not as a stepdaughter, but as someone he wanted to control. By the time the sun started to rise, the document had grown to 47 pages, and I felt something unexpected. Lighter. As if naming the pain robbed it of its power. The next morning, I called Diana Foster, the attorney who had supported me through the protective order process. When she answered with her usual clipped confidence, I said quietly, "Diana, I have documentation I need you to see." An hour later, she sat across from me in a small office on base as I slid the file toward her. She began reviewing it page by page, her eyes narrowing, her fingers tapping the table thoughtfully. When she reached the section describing the forged CID notice and the miscarriage that followed, her jaw tightened. She closed the folder slowly. "Lieutenant Ward, this is not just background context. This is a history of coercive abuse that directly supports intent, escalation, and foreseeability." She leaned back in her chair. "This changes the entire sentencing strategy." I frowned slightly. "How?" She tapped the folder. "Judges and prosecutors need patterns, not isolated events. You have shown a documented history of manipulation, intimidation, and interference with your personal autonomy. It proves that the forgery was not a moment of poor judgment, but the culmination of years of escalating attempts to control you. This could increase the recommended sentencing range significantly." My breath caught. I had not thought of it that way. I had written the timeline because I needed to reclaim my voice, not because I expected it to shift the case. But now hearing Diana say it aloud, hearing her describe Brett's behavior as a legal pattern, not just emotional trauma, created a new sense of empowerment. Diana opened her laptop. "We will submit this as supplemental evidence to DOJ under an aggravating factors clause. Additionally," she looked at me pointedly, "we will need a victim impact statement from you for the sentencing hearing." I felt a flutter of anxiety. I had read those statements before in military briefings, victims pouring their pain onto the page, exposing their deepest wounds to strangers in order to seek justice. The thought made my stomach tighten. Diana must have seen something in my expression because she said softly, "Peyton, it does not have to be emotional. It can be factual, cold even. The impact statement is not about catharsis. It is about clarity. You tell the court what his actions cost you, in concrete terms." That was when I realized something else. Emotional vulnerability had always been Brett's weapon against me. But cold clarity, cold truth, cold logic, those were mine. That night I began writing the statement. I used short, precise sentences, no flourishes, no dramatics, just truth. I wrote about the fear that had lived inside me for years. I wrote about the manipulation, about the harassment, about the forged investigation. Notice about the humiliation at my workplace, about the physical collapse in the restroom, about the ambulance, about the ICU. I wrote about the silence when the doctor said there was no heartbeat. I wrote about the empty crib, the unbought baby clothes, the due date that no longer meant anything. I wrote about the moment the battalion forum turned 400 pairs of eyes toward me and how I found the strength to stand anyway. But I also wrote something else, something even more honest. I wrote that I would have survived the miscarriage. I would have survived the rumors. I would have survived the forged letter. What I struggled to survive was the realization that someone who claimed to love me had orchestrated all of it on purpose. When I finished the statement, it was 5 pages long and felt sharper than any blade he had ever used against me. Diana read it the next day without interrupting. When she finally looked up, her eyes held something between admiration and sadness. "This is powerful," she said. "This will matter." DOJ approved its inclusion within 48 hours and added it to the growing stack of evidence for sentencing. The prosecutors called 2 days later, requesting an additional interview to clarify certain emotional and psychological impacts. They spoke with clinical precision, asking about the timeline of stress symptoms, the escalation of anxiety attacks, the medical complications, and my loss. I answered every question directly, refusing to hide behind polite minimalism the way I used to. If the truth was painful, then let it be painful. It was real. When they finished, the lead prosecutor, Ms. Harper, said, "Lieutenant Ward, your testimony and documentation will carry significant weight at sentencing. The judge will consider your history, your loss, and the behavioral patterns of the defendant. You have done everything right." And for the first time since the investigation began, I felt that maybe I truly had. Over the next week, I watched the pieces fall into place like a puzzle snapping into its final shape. CID delivered supplemental forensic reports linking Brett to every piece of evidence. Wilmington PD added witness statements describing his behavior when the search warrant was executed. The Army filed a supporting memo emphasizing the potential consequences his actions could have had on national security, integrity of military processes, and readiness standards. And my own file, the one I had assembled piece by piece late into the night, became the backbone of the aggravating factors packet submitted to the court. Each page felt like a reclaiming of the years he had stolen. Each line stripped away the fog he had built around me. He had spent years shaping a narrative where he held power and I was small. But now the record told a different story, a story where I stood and he fell. As the sentencing hearing approached, Diana met with me one final time. "This is not about revenge," she reminded gently. "This is about accountability, closure, safety." I nodded, but inside me something whispered more. Justice, not out of hate, but out of necessity. Brett had always counted on my silence. Now, my words were the strongest weapon I had ever held, and for the first time, I felt ready to use them. The morning of the sentencing hearing arrived with a cold, gray sky hanging over downtown Raleigh, and I could feel the weight of it pressing on my shoulders as I stepped out of my car and stood facing the courthouse entrance. News vans lined the street with their antennas pointing into the air like metal trees, and clusters of local reporters stood huddled together holding microphones against the wind. The moment I walked toward the steps, the cameras swung toward me in one synchronized motion. Flashes erupted instantly, and questions overlapped in a rush of noise. "Lieutenant Ward, do you believe justice will be served? Do you have a statement about the fraudulent investigation? Notice? How do you feel about your stepfather being sentenced today?" I kept my face composed as I walked through the storm of voices, refusing to let the chaos pull me under. Inside the courthouse, the air felt warmer but heavier, and the hallway leading to the courtroom was packed with spectators, military personnel, and a few familiar faces from Fort Liberty who had quietly shown up to support me. When I pushed open the door and stepped inside, the room was already filled. Reporters occupied the back rows, typing furiously on laptops. A few Wilmington locals sat on the left murmuring to each other. On the right sat 2 assistant prosecutors reviewing files, while the lead prosecutor, Ms. Harper, stood with her arms folded watching Brett as deputies escorted him inside. It was the first time I had seen him since the protective order hearing, and the sight sent a cold ripple down my spine. He looked smaller than I remembered, older too. His hands were cuffed in front of him and his eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but the moment he spotted me, his expression shifted from surprise to wounded indignation, as if he were the victim here, not me. I took my seat in the front row beside my attorney, Diana Foster, who leaned toward me and whispered, You are ready for this. I exhaled slowly. I hoped she was right. When the judge entered the room, everyone rose. He was a tall, composed man with silver hair and a reputation for being firm and fair. After the bailiff called the court to order, the judge began by reviewing the charges impersonation of a federal officer, forgery, harassment, and intentional interference with a federal investigation. His voice echoed through the room, carrying a gravity that settled over everyone. The prosecutor presented the case first, outlining the timeline of events from Brett's attempts to manipulate me over the years to the forged CID notice to the harm that followed. She referenced the forensic evidence, the digital trail, the materials found at Brett's home, and the medical records documenting the stress-induced collapse that led to the loss of my pregnancy. With each detail, I felt the courtroom shift. Reporters leaned forward, spectators grew still. Brett stared at the table, refusing to look up. The prosecutor then held up a folder and said, "Your Honor, with permission, I would like to read excerpts from Lieutenant Ward's victim impact statement." My stomach tightened, but I nodded. She opened the folder and began reading my words out loud, words I had written in the quiet of my temporary lodging wards that had cost me more courage than I thought I had. The room fell silent. She read about the years of control, the fear, the psychological pressure, the fake investigation. Notice the moment I collapsed in the restroom, the ICU, the emptiness that followed. She read about the loss of my child. A few reporters wiped their eyes. Someone in the back whispered, "My gosh." When she finished, the prosecutor closed the folder and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, the defendant's actions were not accidental. They were deliberate, calculated, and rooted in a long history of coercive behavior. The result was not only professional harm, but profound personal tragedy. We ask the court to impose the maximum allowable sentence under the circumstances." Then it was Brett's turn. His attorney rose and launched into a rambling defense about emotional instability, miscommunication, family tension, and impulsive decisions. He attempted to paint Brett as a flawed man who made a mistake rather than someone who had orchestrated a months-long campaign to destabilize my life. Brett kept glancing at me with the same self-pitying look he always used when he wanted me to feel guilty. When the attorney finished, the judge said, "Mr. Coleman, would you like to speak on your own behalf?" Brett stood slowly and turned toward the judge. His voice trembled, but not with remorse, with indignation. "Your Honor, I never meant to hurt her. I was trying to protect her from making bad choices. She never listened to me. She always shut me out. She twisted things to make me look like the problem. I never wanted any of this." He paused, then looked directly at me. "I loved you, Peyton. I tried to guide you. You destroyed this family, not me." I felt the words hit me like an icy wave. Even now, even with evidence piled against him, even after everything, he still believed he was the victim. The judge nodded once, then looked at me. "Lieutenant Ward, would you like to address the court?" My legs felt heavy as I stood, but when I turned to face Brett, something inside me clicked into place. My voice, when it came, was steady. "You didn't just destroy my career. You killed my child." The room froze. Brett's face drained of color, and for the first time I saw something without disguise. Fear, not fear of punishment. Fear of the truth finally spoken aloud where he could not hide from it. I continued, "You used fear to control me for years. Then you forged a federal investigation notice to push me past my breaking point. You told me I was unfit to serve and unfit to be a mother. Your actions took something from me that I will never get back." I felt my hands trembling, but I lifted my chin. "I will carry this loss for the rest of my life, but I will never carry your shame again." When I sat down, the entire courtroom remained silent for several seconds, as if the air itself had thickened. The judge cleared his throat and looked between the prosecutor's table and the defense. After reviewing the evidence, the statements, and the defendant's conduct, the judge said in a calm, steady voice, "This court finds that the defendant's actions were intentional, harmful, and carried out with clear disregard for the emotional and physical well-being of Lieutenant Ward." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It is the judgment of this court that the defendant, Brett Coleman, is hereby sentenced to 18 months incarceration, followed by 5 years probation." Murmurs spread instantly. Reporters leaned forward, typing rapidly. The judge continued. Additionally, the protective order will remain in full effect, and any violation will result in immediate consequences. Brett's attorney placed a hand on his shoulder as if steadying him, but Brett just stared at me, his expression a mix of disbelief and outrage as deputies moved toward him. When they lifted him to his feet, he tried to turn toward me again, but I refused to look at him. I stared straight ahead at the seal above the judge's bench, feeling the weight of his gaze fall off me like rusted chains snapping loose. As he was led away, reporters rushed out of the room to break the news. The judge adjourned the court, and people began filing out slowly, still whispering about the sentence, the impact statement, and the moment I confronted Brett. Diana touched my arm. "You did exactly what you needed to do," she said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in years, I felt something warm unfold inside my chest. Not joy, not triumph, but relief. The kind that comes from finally stepping out of a burning building into clean, cold air. And as I walked out of the courtroom past the cameras, the noise, and the bright afternoon light, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Justice did not erase the loss. It never could. But it gave me something I had not felt in a very long time. My life back. In the weeks following the sentencing hearing, the ripples of the case moved outward like a stone thrown into a still lake, and everywhere those ripples reached, something shifted. The first wave hit Wilmington almost immediately. Local news stations ran nightly segments about the case, focusing on the forged federal investigation. Notice the danger of impersonating military authority and the emotional and medical consequences that followed. My name was kept private in the broadcasts, but everyone in my hometown knew who Brett had raised and who he had targeted. The comments on those articles were merciless. Neighbors who had once invited him to barbecues now wrote that they had always sensed something off. Former coworkers called his actions unforgivable. A few people defended him at first, but as more details came out, even they fell silent. The pressure grew so intense that Brett's own friends stopped visiting or calling, and his extended family issued statements distancing themselves from him. For someone who thrived on controlling how people perceived him, the public rejection was a punishment deeper than any courtroom could deliver. My mother felt the aftershocks too. At first, she refused to believe Brett had done something so deliberate. She called me crying, insisting it had to be an accident or a misunderstanding or a moment of terrible judgment. She insisted he was under stress, that he never meant to harm me, that he would never do something so cruel intentionally. But when the full evidence packet went public and she read the forensic analysis, the email logs, the matching paper stock, the digital tool history, she called again, but this time her voice sounded broken. "Peyton, I did not know he was capable of this," she whispered. "I should have protected you. I should have seen the signs." I listened quietly because part of me wanted to comfort her, but another part, the part that had spent years bending around Brett's moods and excuses, felt too tired to offer reassurance. Still, she left him. Within days of the sentencing, she packed her bags and moved into a small apartment near her sister. She asked if she could visit me at Fort Liberty, but I told her gently that I needed time and space to heal, and she surprised me by accepting that without argument. "I love you," she said before hanging up. "I know I failed you, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn back your trust." I appreciated the words, but trust was something fragile, something I was not ready to hold again. Meanwhile, at Fort Liberty, the case had spread far beyond my battalion. Soldiers I barely knew approached me quietly in hallways, offering small nods of respect. Officers who rarely acknowledged junior leaders shook my hand and told me they admired my resilience. It felt strange to be seen so clearly by people who had once only known me as the quiet MP lieutenant, who did her job with precision and avoided drama. The support felt warm, but also overwhelming. I needed something steadier. My commander arranged for me to transfer to a different company within the brigade so I could have a fresh start. I packed my office slowly, placing my certificate's challenge coins and carefully folded patrol uniforms into a cardboard box. The name tape, Ward, stitched in green thread, seemed to look brighter than it had in months, as if relieved to leave the shadows behind. The new unit welcomed me with professionalism rather than pity, which I appreciated more than I expected. They treated me like an officer, like a peer, someone with skills, not wounds. The company commander, Captain Evans, met me on my first day and shook my hand firmly. "Lieutenant Ward, we are glad to have you," he said. "You come highly recommended, and I want you to know you will have the space you need to get back on your feet." It was exactly what I needed to hear. Over the next few weeks, my life settled into a quiet rhythm. I started therapy twice a week, focusing on trauma recovery, grief processing, and rebuilding personal boundaries. My therapist, Major Dalton, was sharp, steady, and never pushed too hard. She helped me identify the patterns that had shaped my relationship with Brett, how he had chipped away at my confidence over the years, how my silence had been a survival tactic, and how my strength had always been present, even when buried. One afternoon, she said something that stayed with me. "Patent resilience is not the absence of pain. It is the decision to move forward despite it." I wrote that sentence in my journal and read it again every morning. I also began taking short runs around post-running trails, something I had stopped doing early in my pregnancy. The first few attempts left my lungs burning, but every lap felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My feet hitting the ground became a steady reminder that I was still here, still moving, still alive. On Saturdays, I visited the small memorial garden near the chapel. It became a place where I could breathe without feeling watched. I never stayed long, but the peace helped. One day while I was there, a new soldier approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, excuse me," he said. "I'm Private Thomas. I just wanted to say your case changed things around here. Leadership has added new training about recognizing manipulative behavior in families and reporting intimidation before it escalates." I felt my breath catch. "Thank you, Private," I said softly. "That means a lot." He smiled awkwardly, then walked away, leaving me with a quiet realization. My pain had not been meaningless. It had created something protective, something that might shield someone else from a fate like mine. A few weeks after that, I received a message from the Office of Personnel Management notifying me that my case had influenced recommendations for updating federal impersonation guidance in military environments. I reread the message 3 times before I believed it. My history, my loss, my testimony had become part of something larger, part of a system meant to prevent future harm. That knowledge grounded me more deeply than anything else had since the ICU. But healing was not a straight line. There were days I woke with heavy grief pressing on my ribs, days when I avoided mirrors, days when I felt anger crackling under my skin like static. On those days, I let myself feel everything without judging it. I wrote in my journal. I went to therapy. I talked with Amani, who checked in every few days with her steady warmth. She never asked questions that dug too deep. She simply reminded me that I was not alone, and slowly the anger softened. The grief settled into a quieter place inside me. I began volunteering for extra shifts, helping reorganize case files and training junior MPs on investigative protocol. Returning to structure helped rebuild my confidence. Every report I wrote, every soldier I mentored, every shift I completed reminded me that I was still capable, still competent, still a damn good officer. By mid-December, a new sense of normalcy began forming around me. I could walk past the CID building without flinching. I could answer questions in staff meetings without my voice shaking. I could wake up in the morning without feeling the crushing weight of Brett's shadow. But perhaps the clearest sign of change came one evening after work. I was leaving the motor pool at sunset when I caught my reflection in a window. For a moment, I froze, surprised by the steadiness in my eyes, the quiet strength that had always been there but buried under years of pressure. I felt something like pride stir inside me, not for surviving what happened, but for reclaiming the person I had been before Brett fought to break me. The consequences of his actions had reshaped his life with public shame, legal punishment, and isolation. But the consequences for me shaped something different. A path toward healing. A future built on strength, not fear. And the more distance I gained from him, the more clearly I understood that I had not just endured what he did. I had risen above it. I had carved out a life he could never reach again. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something close to peace. The air was cool the first morning I decided to run again, a thin mist hanging over Fort Liberty, as if the installation itself were exhaling after a long night, and as my shoes struck the pavement in a slow, careful rhythm, I felt the weight of the past months loosen fraction by fraction. The familiar sound of cadence calls drifted from a training field nearby, the sharp, energetic voices of new military police soldiers moving in perfect formation, their boots hitting the ground like one heartbeat. For a long time, I had avoided this part of post because it reminded me too much of what I had lost, the future I had imagined, the child I had hoped would one day see me in uniform and feel proud. But today, something felt different. Instead of pain, I felt a quiet sense of belonging, as if the ground beneath my feet was welcoming me back. As I rounded the curve near Range Road, I passed a group of MP trainees practicing traffic stop procedures under the strict watch of a senior NCO. Their voices carried through the crisp air, firm, confident, steady. I slowed for a moment, letting their determination wash over me. There had been a time when I had doubted whether I belonged among them anymore. A time when the trauma felt like it had permanently fractured something inside me, leaving me unfit to lead. But watching them now, these young soldiers standing tall in their crisp uniforms, trying so hard to get every detail right, I felt an unexpected sense of hope. My pace picked up again, and with each stride, my breathing settled into a calmer rhythm. The sun began to rise, casting long golden lines across the asphalt and turning the mist into something soft and luminous. For the first time in months, the morning did not feel heavy. It felt open. After completing my usual loop, I headed toward the MP training complex, passing the wooden sign carved with the unit crest. A small group of instructors were gathered near the entrance reviewing paperwork. One of them, a tall second lieutenant I had met briefly after my transfer, looked up when he saw me. "Ma'am, good morning," he called out, jogging over with a respectful nod. I paused, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. "Morning, Lieutenant," I said. "Everything going well with the new class?" He nodded enthusiastically, then hesitated, his expression shifting into something more serious. "Ma'am, if you do not mind me saying this, your case changed a lot around here." He spoke quietly, careful not to let the others overhear. Policy updates, training briefings, leadership memos, the whole brigade had to take a hard look at how intimidation from family members can impact soldiers. Some of the younger MPs have said your testimony helped them speak up about things they had been scared to report. I felt something warm move through my chest, a sensation soft but powerful, like a small flame catching and rising. "Thank you, Lieutenant," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "That means more than you know." He nodded again, saluted, then returned to his group, leaving me standing alone in the soft morning light. I took a slow breath and let his words settle inside me. For months, I had carried the belief that the loss of my child was a private tragedy, a hollow space carved into me that could never be filled. But now, hearing that my story had sparked change, hearing that soldiers felt safer because I had spoken up, something shifted. The grief did not disappear. Grief never does, but for the first time it felt like it had shape, like it had transformed into something larger than my pain, something meaningful. I resumed my walk toward the parking lot, listening to the distant hum of engines, the clatter of gear, the echo of morning drills. It all sounded familiar again, not haunting, but grounding. When I reached my car, I paused before getting in, letting my gaze sweep across the installation. Countless buildings, training areas, vehicles, soldiers moving with purpose. This place had carried some of my worst memories, but it had also carried my resilience. I drove to the memorial garden near the chapel later that afternoon, a peaceful spot with rows of white stones, small plaques, and benches surrounded by tall pines. I had come here many times in silence, seeking something I could not name. Today, I felt ready to sit longer. I chose a bench near the center where a gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. The sunlight filtered through the branches in thin gold strands, laying across my hands like warm threads. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of pine sap and warm stone. For a moment, I let myself imagine the child I lost. Not in a painful way, in a gentle way. I imagined small fingers curled around mine. I imagined laughter echoing off these trees. I imagined walking here someday with another child, maybe not now, but when I was ready. The ache in my chest softened into something bearable. After a while, footsteps approached on the gravel path, and I opened my eyes to see Imani Brooks standing a few feet away, still in her duty uniform, her expression soft. "Thought I might find you here," she said as she sat beside me. "You doing okay today?" I nodded. "Better than I thought I would be." She watched me quietly for a moment, then said, You know the soldiers are still talking about you, right? The way you stood up at the battalion forum, the way you faced him in court. They say you showed what strength looks like." Her words caught me off guard. I stared at the stone pathway for several seconds before answering. "I did not feel strong," I said quietly. "Most days I felt like I was just trying to breathe." "Strength is not loud," she replied softly. "Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it looks exactly like this." We sat together in comfortable silence, letting the breeze carry the weight of unspoken things. Eventually, she stood and touched my shoulder gently. "When you are ready to come back to full duty, we have your back. No rush." I watched her walk away, grateful in a way I could not fully express. When she disappeared around the corner, I looked back at the garden one more time. This place did not erase the pain, but it held it gently. Later that week, I returned to my normal work schedule, easing into responsibilities without the frantic pressure I once placed on myself. I found joy in small things again, organizing case files, mentoring junior soldiers, even standing in formation during morning accountability. Life did not snap back into place perfectly, but it grew steadier piece by piece. And as the days passed, I felt myself opening to the possibility of happiness again. Some evenings, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in soft orange tones. Other nights, I wrote in my journal, not about pain, but about progress, about the miles I ran, the conversations that helped, the small victories that reminded me I was moving forward. The grief remained part of me, but it no longer defined me. One morning, during a staff briefing, a young specialist walked up to me afterward, twisting her patrol cap nervously in her hands. "Mom," she said quietly, "I read the new policy memo. I just wanted to say thank you for speaking up. It helped me realize something in my own family situation, and I talked to someone about it for the first time." I did not know what to say for a moment. Then I placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "I am proud of you, specialist. You did the right thing." She nodded quickly, her eyes bright, before hurrying back to her formation. As she walked away, I felt a deep calm settle through me. My loss had carved a scar that would never fully fade, but it had also created space for others to find their voice. Maybe that was the meaning I had been searching for all along. The sun rose higher outside, casting warm light across the headquarters building. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt a quiet certainty wash over me. I had not just survived, I had grown. I had helped others grow. And in that moment, I knew with absolute clarity that my child's short existence had changed things in ways that mattered. Their loss had not been in vain. It had reshaped me into someone stronger, someone steadier, someone fully alive. And as I walked toward the training grounds, hearing cadence echo in the distance, hope rose inside me like a steady, bright flame. The sky was still dark when I parked near the chapel and stepped out into the cold morning air, the kind of sharp, clean chill that hinted at dawn but had not yet surrendered to it. Fort Liberty was quiet at this hour, emptied of the usual rush of soldiers' vehicles and voices. Only the soft hum of distant generators and the slow rustle of pine branches filled the silence. I walked toward the memorial garden, the gravel crunching under my boots in a steady rhythm that matched the calm rising inside my chest. For months, this place had held my grief like cupped hands catching rain. Now, as I approached the entrance lined with low stone walls and small plaques gleaming faintly in the pre-dawn light, I felt something different, something clearer, lighter. I held a single white flower between my fingers, its petals trembling slightly in the breeze. The garden was empty except for me and the soft whisper of wind weaving between the markers. The world felt still, as if waiting for something. I stepped onto the path and moved slowly toward the center, the place where I had sat so many times when the hurt was sharp enough to steal my breath. Today, the pain was gentler, present but softened like a scar warmed by sunlight. I reached the small clearing under the tall pine tree, the one with roots that twisted around the stone bench, and kneeled down, placing the white flower gently at its base. My fingers lingered on the cool earth for a moment before I drew a steady breath and whispered the words I had not been strong enough to say until now. "I am free now." The sentence left my lips quietly, but it seemed to echo in the stillness, as if the garden itself acknowledged it, recognized it, accepted it. I closed my eyes and let the truth of those words settle into my bones. For years, I had lived under the shadow of a man who taught me to fear his moods more than I trusted my own instincts. He had shaped my choices, narrowed my world, and convinced me that my value was measured by obedience. He had turned my dreams into bargaining chips, my confidence into something fragile, my silence into a survival strategy. And then, when his power began to slip, he reached for the cruelest weapon he could create: a forged investigation, a calculated manipulation designed to unravel me from the inside until I broke. He succeeded in taking something precious from me, something irreplaceable. But he did not succeed in taking me. My breath came out slow and warm against the cold air. When I opened my eyes, the horizon had begun to change. Thin streaks of pale gold stretched across the edge of the sky, bleeding gently into rose-colored clouds. Dawn was coming quietly and steadily, just as healing had come quietly and steadily, one breath, one day, one painful step at a time. I stood and brushed the dirt from my hands, letting my gaze sweep across the garden. The plaques shimmered faintly, catching the early light like small mirrors reflecting every life honored here, every story carved into memory. The thought filled me with a deep sense of perspective. My loss was immense, but I was still here, still able to rise, still able to continue a life that mattered. I walked toward the far side of the garden where the path overlooked a training field. The first group of soldiers had begun to gather for morning PT, their silhouettes moving like shadows against the brightening sky. Their laughter carried faintly in the air, a reminder that life continued with a rhythm larger than any one person's pain. As I watched them, I felt a sharp but gentle ache. I imagined the child I lost running among them someday, maybe chasing fireflies or tugging at my uniform or sitting on my hip while I explained what it meant to serve. That future would never happen, but the love I had hoped to give did not die. It lived differently now, carried in the policies changed, the soldiers protected the voices, encouraged the courage sparked in others because I finally chose to speak. The wind shifted, brushing my cheek like a soft touch. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders and headed toward the stone bench one last time, sitting down and allowing the warmth of the rising sun to touch my face. For so long I had believed that healing meant returning to who I was before the pain, but now I understood something deeper. Healing meant becoming someone new, someone shaped not by fear but by truth, someone defined not by what was taken but by what survived. The sun finally crested the tree line, bathing the entire garden in soft gold. The light caught the white flower at the base of the pine tree, making its petals glow as if lit from within. I felt my throat tighten, but not with sorrow, with gratitude. Gratitude for the strength I had found. Gratitude for the people who had stood beside me like quiet pillars. Gratitude for the justice that had been served, even if it could never fully balance the scales of loss. And gratitude most of all for the freedom that now stretched in front of me like the open road leading away from this place into something new, something unbroken. As I rose from the bench, my phone buzzed softly in my pocket, a message from Imani checking in before PT. I smiled slightly and typed back a simple, "I'm okay. Thank you." Then I slipped the phone away and took one final look at the garden, letting the image imprint itself in my mind. The white flower, the tall pines, the sunlight spilling in like a quiet blessing. I turned toward the path leading out and began walking slowly, savoring each step. The day felt young, full of possibility. My footsteps carried me toward the chapel doors, then past them, then toward the parking lot where my car waited, but I did not hurry. For the first time in a long time, I felt no urgency, no fear trailing behind me, no weight pressing down. Only the steady beat of my heart and the soft warmth spreading across the horizon. When I reached the edge of the garden, I paused one last time, whispering almost to myself, almost to the child I lost, almost to the woman I used to be. "You did not break me." And then, with the sunrise lifting fully above Fort Liberty, washing everything in gold, I walked forward into my life unbound, untouched by his shadow, ready for whatever came next, because I was finally free. As I walked away from the memorial garden and toward the quiet parking lot where the first rays of sunrise glowed across the windshield of my car, I felt the kind of calm that only comes after surviving something that should have broken you. I could hear my footsteps echo softly against the pavement, each one steady, firm, grounded, and for the first time in months, those footsteps did not feel like they were dragging the weight of grief behind them. They felt like a beginning. And standing there with the warmth of the sun stretching across my face, I realized something deeply important, something I want every viewer listening to my story to understand. Sometimes the greatest battles of our lives are not fought in uniform or in conference rooms or in courts or in the open arenas where the world sees your courage. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought in silence behind closed doors inside the walls of a home where no one sees what you are enduring and no one realizes the strength it takes simply to stay standing. For some people, family is a source of comfort and foundation. For others, family is the first battlefield. For me, both things were true. I grew up believing that loyalty meant staying, no matter how deeply it hurt, that family meant blood, even when the blood you share comes with scars. I was raised to think that leaving was betrayal, that protecting myself was selfish, that silence was safer than the truth. But the truth has a way of rising whether you allow it or not, and when it rises, it changes everything. What happened to me was not a single moment or a single act. It was years of being told I was not enough, years of being belittled, years of being controlled, years of being made small in the one place where I should have felt safe. And when someone like that sees you grow stronger, sees you succeed, sees you break free, they will reach for whatever power they think they still hold. My stepfather reached for the one thing he believed could still destroy me, fear. He thought fear would keep me quiet. He thought fear would keep me obedient. He thought fear would keep me weak. But here is the truth that I learned the hardest way possible. Fear can break you for a moment, but truth can rebuild you for a lifetime. Standing in front of that garden, I finally understood the power of choosing myself, even when it meant standing alone. And that is why I am speaking directly to you now, to the person on the other side of this screen. Someone who may be older, younger, somewhere in between. Someone who might carry their own quiet wounds or their own unspoken memories. I want to ask you something honestly, directly, gently. Have you ever been forced to choose between family and survival? Have you ever sacrificed your peace to keep someone else comfortable? Have you ever stayed quiet because you were afraid that speaking would cost you everything? Maybe your story does not look like mine. Maybe no forged investigation ruined your career or shattered your future. Maybe no one tried to impersonate federal authority to break your life apart. But pain has many shapes, and control has many faces, and harm does not always look like violence. Sometimes harm sounds like a quiet insult repeated until you believe it. Sometimes it feels like someone deciding your choices for you. Sometimes it looks like someone treating your dreams like inconveniences. Sometimes it is the exhaustion of trying your best to be loved by someone who has already decided not to see your worth. And maybe you have carried that weight for years, telling yourself it is normal, telling yourself it is what you deserve, telling yourself that leaving would mean you are disloyal. But being loyal to people who hurt you is not loyalty. It is self-abandonment. And choosing yourself is not betrayal. It is survival. If hearing my story makes your chest tighten, or your stomach twist, or your breath catch even for a moment, then maybe something inside you recognizes a truth you have been avoiding. And if that is the case, I want you to know something without hesitation or doubt. You are not weak for feeling hurt. You are not dramatic for wanting peace. You are not selfish for choosing safety. You are not wrong for wanting a life that does not require you to shrink just to fit into someone else's comfort. You deserve a life without fear. You deserve a life where your voice matters. You deserve a life that does not require surviving the people who claim to love you. And if anyone ever told you otherwise, they were wrong. I learned all of this one painful step at a time, and I am still learning it, but I am standing here, proof that you can walk away from the people who broke you and still find yourself whole. Proof that justice exists, even if it comes slower than it should. Proof that healing is possible even when loss is permanent. Proof that freedom is not a place you arrive at once, but a path you choose every day. And if my story reaches you, if it touches something inside you, if it reflects something you have endured, then I hope you let it remind you of your own strength, because you have more of it than you know. Before I go, Before this chapter closes, I want to ask you something, not as a soldier or a narrator, but as someone who lived through something that almost destroyed me and came out standing. Have you ever had to choose between family and survival? Tell me where you are watching from and what you would have done.